Sights, sounds, and information just for you from your friends at ASM.
Welcome to the turn of night.
You're listening to classic rock with the werewolf. A midnight howl ain't no foul. So let's party down in Hard Rock Town. Ha ha! The radio's volume lowered as we entered the lab where Professor Williams worked. He nodded to us and then quickly resumed soldering the wires of a large speaker. The speaker itself looked as though it was from the 70s, an era he was likely familiar with. On a nearby work table, books on stereo equipment, frequencies, and assorted manuals were strewn about. Of note, there was a manila file folder with the words, "The Sullivan Haunting, 1973" printed on it. As researchers into the paranormal, we more or less debunked the idea of ghosts and offered logical explanations. That was until we entered into one home where the family was being terrorized. We didn't know who to reach out to until our team member Steve suggested Professor Williams could help. Steve himself was more than a little superstitious, and we often ribbed him about it. He too always played the classic rock station. When asked why, he insisted, "It keeps us safe and organized. It's a routine." Aside from enjoying the loud guitar sound, we let it go as one of his quirks. I asked the professor, "Hey, what are you doing with that old speaker? They make new ones, you know." "I'm recording these songs on a high-end system from the radio. They will then be played through this now so-called vintage speaker as a way of dealing with your so-called poltergeist activity. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Sullivan case?" We were. It had been written about and even featured on television shows where the family and witnesses are interviewed and then the situation reenacted by actors. The one son, Jim, had grown up to become a respected private detective. The whole family had moved on, but it was still a haunting worth mentioning, as the entity would latch on to new families and move from place to place. The speaker is from the 1970s. The songs are from that same decade as well. It's documented that the oldest son accidentally turned on the stereo when the family was cornered in the basement. The entity apparently dissipated, giving them the time they needed to escape. We were puzzled. I spoke up, "But it didn't kill it. The thing eventually pulled itself together and waited for the next family, and even followed them when they moved to a new house. We spoke to the two brothers, and they confirmed it. The thing also came back years later at a house near where they grew up." The professor was finished with the speaker and began writing something down in a notebook. He replied, "Yes, like I said, the energy only dissipated. It was temporarily disrupted. Things like this can either fade out or regroup in the right conditions. What the music, in combination with the radio frequency, did was disturb the particles of its very structure." "So, you believe in ghosts? Malevolent spirits like the one we're investigating?" "You know, I'm not going to debate the spiritual aspects of your field. I'm also not convinced that these things have a conscience, no more than a tornado or a blizzard have feelings. They just are." "So you think that ghosts are a natural occurrence?" "No, again, I'm not arguing the afterlife, theology, or the human soul. I'm merely saying that this is residual energy caused by a drastic disruption, an explosion, a noisy crowd, or some sort of blunt force trauma, and it's likely been enhanced by the electricity that runs through each structure and appliance around us. He paused, and then we harness it with this. He held out a small box. It's a type of vacuum and contains an anisotropic crystal. This is how we catch it. Hey, just like a real Ghostbuster. He shot me a look and then shook his head. We waited for the professor to pack his things. He quickly organized the books and papers on his desk into a neat pile, poured us each a cup of coffee, and off we went. We had been given keys to the place, even though the family were still home. They would soon leave and stay at a nearby hotel while we did our work. Steve had set up cameras throughout the house and was checking his laptop to see if there'd been any activity throughout the day. The professor set up a speaker in the front room. He had placed small battery-operated radios in the upstairs bedrooms and hallway. We could hear the crackling of barely tuned-in stations when suddenly an ear-piercing scream rang throughout the house. The professor had set up his energy harvesting container, handed me a remote, and stood behind a speaker with one hand on the stereo volume. And suddenly, there it was. In 5 years of having our own paranormal investigation business, we had never seen anything like it. Hideous, with an air of evil about it. It slowly moved towards us and mouthed words in some unknown language. The professor held up his hand as if instructing us to wait. It made a sudden motion towards us when the professor yelled, "Now! Playing your favorite classic rock hits all night long! Yow!"
The lights are on as the evening shadows are creeping in. Hopefully, you won't get caught in the turn of night.